Hello everyone, welcome back to the new news. My name is Paul and I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that everyone's having a wonderful Thursday, and I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe, and if not, I hope that you do find that safety and security in the very near future. There's a lot of stuff that's been happening today, a lot of stuff happening within Ukraine, some of it funny, a lot of it depressing, a lot of it kind of bad. There's a lot of stuff going on throughout the world. You have global terrorism, you have, obviously there's some tensions right now between Syria and Turkey. You have, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine, and you have other developments such as in Azerbaijan, Armenia, Taiwan. So in general, not a lot of good stuff, right? We also have collateral hunger that's affecting the entire planet on top of climate change. But luckily, you guys have made this an awesome community. We're never doing super chats on this channel. We are never pushing merchandising. 100% of everything we do is about giving back to the very news that we are delivering here on the stream. And you guys allow us to do that as the community. And please be sure to check out the video description. There's a ton of different links down there. We're always looking for more. We're asking for more. If you have a link for a charity or an organization, fundraiser, what have you, please jump onto the Discord. Let a staff member know. Shoot us that link and shoot us a short description, a short summary of what they do, and we'll get the vetting process started. 80% of all of the charities that we have listed, 80% or more of their donations actually go to helping people with their programs. 20% or less of all of those links, 20% of less of their donations that they receive actually go to salaries and administration's costs, meaning we're actually helping people. That's what we're here for. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, that's fine. Give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us. The reason being is that ultimately, the more people that come here, the more good we can do throughout the world overall. And that's really the point of this channel. We hope to get to the point where we're actually able to put a fundraiser on every single stream that we do. And we actually want to raise money for different causes with every single stream whenever we're delivering the news. We want to have something attached to this stream that helps people throughout the world. And that list of organizations isn't going to go away. We also maintain it on our Discord and also on our official website as well, where we break them up by region. But other than that, there's a ton of news, obviously, to get through tonight. I please implore you guys to make comments and ask questions. It always, I understand a lot of this stuff can be very difficult to understand as a whole. Even in some situations, I don't fully understand myself. I am not an expert in everything, but I will at least give my insight and try to answer your questions to the best of my ability with what knowledge I do have. And so please go ahead, ask questions, and I can answer those questions right here during the stream throughout. So if you have questions on anything, feel free to let us know. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the news with, of course, our special report ongoing here in Ukraine. And we have three different topics coming out of Kyiv today. The first one is the fact that it's less war crimes, more crimes against humanity, which is really the title of this. And that's really the theme of the day, is crimes against humanity. We've talked on this topic somewhat for a little bit, and I figured right off the bat we should probably explain what some of this means. And why do we classify, why does this whole event go beyond a tragedy? Why do people call for genocide and ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity? Well, as of today, quote, as of August the 4th, Russian troops have committed about 26,465 war crimes against Ukraine and its citizens. And that's coming from the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine. And I wanted to go through and kind of help you understand what it is we're actually talking about. What is a war crime? What are crimes against humanity? Why is there a call in the International Criminal Court about it? Why is Dmytro Kuleba, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, pressing this issue so much? And what is it that we're really talking about when we have this stance here? We have a very plainly stated bias for Ukraine on this channel, and I want you to kind of understand where that comes from. And it comes from our very own stuff. This is from the United Nations website. This is their official website, and this is where they go and give you the backgrounder regarding what crimes against humanity is. You know, what is genocide? What is ethnic cleansing? What is war crimes? And all of that, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, all fall under crimes against humanity. Well, there's actually a definition. This definition comes under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which is where it was developed. And it's Article 7 of that statute, and it says For the Crimes Against Humanity, definition 1. For the purpose of this statute, crimes against humanity means any of the following acts when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack, murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation or forcible transfer of the population, imprisonment, or other severe deprivation of physical liberty in violation of fundamental rules of international law, torture, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, and any other form of sexual violence or comparable gravity. Persecution against an identifiable group or collectivity on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender as defined in paragraph 3 and other grounds that are universally recognized as impermissible under international law in connection with any act referred to in this paragraph or any crime within the jurisdiction of the court. Enforced disappearances of persons, the crime of apartheid, and other inhumane acts of similar character intentionally causing great suffering and serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. Now, there's a lot of stuff that gets unwrapped into that. That was pretty long and extensive. But throughout this war, and throughout the course of the war, as we've seen just here on the channel, and once again, as viewers, you only see 10 to 25% of what we actually see. A lot of this is too graphic and too horrific for us to really, wish to show this, but there are things that we certainly don't believe everyone needs to see. There are certainly times when you need to see that stuff, but not all of the time. And what we do research, what we see it is all of the time, which is why we take a day off every Monday. But we've seen murder, we've seen extermination, we've seen the forced deportation of peoples, we've seen the imprisonment and deprivation of physical liberty, we've seen torture, we've seen rape, we've seen persecution, we've seen disappearance of persons, we've seen other inhumane acts. We've hit pretty much every single one of these. And that doesn't call into question the protocols of the Geneva Convention regarding military planning. That doesn't call into question any of that. Genocide basically follows the exact same thing. Definition of genocide under Article 2. It is in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculating to bring about its physical destruction in part or in whole, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring people or children of the group to another group. And ethnic cleansing is very similar, rendering an area ethnically homogeneous by using force or intimidation to remove persons of given groups from the area. So that is what the definition of this is, which is, to put it in short. And what this means is with genocide, you are keeping them there and purposely destroying them. Ethnic cleansing is you're destroying them, but you're allowing them to escape. That is the key difference between the two. And both of those are classified as crimes against humanity, and they are made up of war crimes, which I'm not going to go through all of the war crimes because there's a lot of them, and there's 4 conventions and 3 different protocols to the conventions to talk about it. But if you want to actually read through and understand what we're talking about when we're talking about crimes against humanity and genocide and ethnic cleansing, and why this call is so strong for this, the evidence is there. The removal of children for genocide. That's the forced deportation of orphans, Ukrainian orphans, to Russia. That is the usage of grad systems against cities of people, which violates more than one war crime, but that could be contributed to extermination, forced imprisonment, deprivation of liberties. Look at Mariupol. Look at the checkpoints there in the Zaporizhia Oblast. It's there. The argument is very strong, and it is there. So all of this entire map is available on our website, by the way. I post it before every stream, so if you want to read more, you most certainly can. JL says, do you think that the Russian army within itself is encouraging each other to this kind of acts? Do you think that there are any guidelines from the officers? Well, that's the hard point. That's the hard one to determine. But we can say with relative certainty that there are I wouldn't say it's guidelines as a result of the officers, like you are going to rape, pillage, murder all of these people. It's the lack thereof, actually. That it falls under what we would consider ROEs, or rules of engagement. Every military campaign ever, well, at least since the Fourth Geneva Convention, has had really rules of engagement. Before we even went to the embassy, even though time was of the essence at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad when it was getting overrun by protesters, we had to have a rules of engagement brief before we got there, and then we also had a rules of engagement brief after we had arrived from the embassy staff themselves, who were amazing. The embassy staff there was awesome, and they were very, very knowledgeable about what they were doing. But we had to sit down and take time to get a lecture on, this is what you can and cannot do. Even though mission oriented wise, time was the objective. Time had precedent in meeting the objective, and we still had to sit through that. The Russians, on the other hand, don't seem to have any rules of engagement. There is no limitations that they are putting on their forces. It's not that they are giving them guidelines of, you will do these things. It is the lack of guidance, which is a violation of that. That's why the rules of engagement exist. That's why ROEs are there, to prevent war crimes, to prevent things, to tell your troops what they can and cannot do on the battlefield, to prevent collateral damage and collateral loss of life. And we don't see this. We see Russians drinking openly on the front lines. We've seen Russians drinking when they're when they're barracked in an area, such as a school or whatever in the Donbass. We've seen looting on a massive scale. We've seen summary execution, castration. We've seen torture. We've seen rape. We've seen all of this stuff, and it's too widespread to consider it to be isolated individuals or isolated groups doing these things. If it was just particularly horrible, there were a lot of groups, but it wasn't the entire army, I would say then it wouldn't be purposeful. If there were several companies or BTGs that were particularly ruthless, then I would say then it would have just been a terrible war and not a genocide. But we don't see this. What we see is the entirety of the Russian army perpetrating in this. And that is the telling sign. So, no, to answer your question in short, no, it's not that they are giving guidelines to do this. It's the lack of guidelines to not to. And that's where it is. That's where that lies. And so we continue down as the situation doesn't improve. Once again, one of the reasons for genocide and ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity being called, is missing children and deported children. We talked about deported children a little bit yesterday, but here, missing children, as of August the 4th, due to Russian military aggression in Ukraine, 211 Ukrainian children are reported missing. And that's calling from Alexei Surohev, who is the head of the Organizational and Analytical Support and Operational Response Department of the National Police of Ukraine. That is a mouthful. Wow. That's an interesting title, my friend. But people are missing. People are buried in rubble. People are missing in general. People have been kidnapped. There's been forced disappearances, especially amongst officials. But children fall into that category too. And children, unfortunately, like they said, 211 children are missing at this point. Whether they have been killed, captured, forcibly deported, or buried under rubble, we don't know. But it is a large quantity of children that are missing. And whenever the prosecutor's office usually releases the statement regarding Ukrainian children, they only talk about those that have been killed and those that have been injured. This is really one of the first times we've seen the missing statistic, which we've started to see over the last about week and a half. But still rather troublesome. Very troublesome. Luckily, about 2/3 of Ukrainian children have left the country, which is very good to know. They're in other countries where they'll actually be safe, not excluding Russia. I don't count Russia into that because that falls once again into forced deportations, removal of children of a group and sending them to another group, and all of that, which falls under the ethnic cleansing and genocide thing. And once again, the popular hashtag, not a target. What is this? It's talking about the Geneva Conventions, and even major organizations are using it, including this right here. This is the official Twitter of the World Health Organization operating within Ukraine, and they came out with a terrifying statistic today. As of August, or 4th of August, 434 attacks on healthcare have been verified in Ukraine by the World Health Organization. These attacks took place between 24th of February and 28th of July, causing 85 deaths and 101 injuries. Healthcare should never be a target, and it's very explicitly stated in every single Geneva Convention and every single protocol thereof, and under international customary humanitarian law, that you do not target civilian or military medical facilities. You do not. In fact, you take extreme measures to prevent the destruction and loss of life and of medical facilities and medical personnel. JL asked the question, is alcohol or any other psychoactive substances usage by soldiers banned by the Geneva Convention during their service? Under the Geneva Convention, no. It is not banned by the Geneva Convention. Most standing armies throughout the world, most professional standing armies throughout the world, I should say, have a ban of usage of alcohol when operating military equipment and weaponry, and when in a deployment. In the United States, for instance, it was banned for us to have any kind of alcohol use or sexual relations when overseas. So, or if we were conducting live fire military exercises, of course. I also, when I was running an armory for 2.5 years, I was banned from basically having alcohol because I was on duty 24/7. And I have to be able to carry a firearm when I'm inside of an armory. In general, it's an organizational ban, and standing armies throughout the world have these bans. I'm sure it is a ban in Russia. In fact, I can almost guarantee it is a ban in Russia. That kind of goes against a lot of tradition. Traditionally, alcohol and the usage of alcohol, whether that's been beer or liquor, is heavily used throughout most of history. You see it on board ships. You see it on, you see it with allocations of beer and whiskey and stuff to troops clear up until about World War I and even into World War II. But you start seeing it phase out after World War II, and Korea-ish is really when that ends. A little bit during Vietnam too. But that's for units not seeing active combat. And every BTG at this point, with the manpower issues that Russia is having, they are actually kind of having an issue. Everyone's basically committed to the front lines at this point, and so that's not a place that you should be drinking to begin with, which is some common sense. But the usage of alcohol and intoxication, whether that's through illicit substances, psychoactive drugs, or whether that's through prescriptions, or whether that's through alcohol use and consumption, intoxication does not mean that you're no longer liable for your actions. In fact, it means that you're even more liable for your actions because you put yourself into the position to conduct an action that you otherwise would not have done. Like JL, like using substance can trigger this kind of bloody behavior for sure, especially in this environment. Yeah, it can. There's actually some very good instances where incidents like that did happen. And it has happened throughout history in every aspect and every faction throughout history. Some kind of illicit substance use has certainly caused deaths. And I'm not saying that crimes and war crimes don't happen. The Ukrainians certainly have committed war crimes. There's no doubt about that. It's just that, once again, you're not seeing, the Ukrainians. They're not wiping out entire cities. They're not wiping out entire groups of people. They're not just killing Russians to kill Russians. They're killing Russian troops because they're invading their country. And they're trying to use, with whatever degree of capability they have, a precision strike to do so. They're being methodical about how they're attacking. Russia is really just using a scorched earth policy, and the war crimes, you don't have to look any further than outside of this frame with Bucha, Hostomel, Borodyanka, Irpin. All of these suffer under horrendous conditions, horrendous atrocities that are still ongoing investigation months later, and will be continuing investigations for probably years to come. And half the country, or I shouldn't say half the country, but a third of the country is still under occupation. So who knows, especially with some of these areas that have been occupied for longer, such as Kherson, what we're going to find. Mariupol is going to be indescribable, I think, in its horror once it's been liberated. And that's after seeing the horrors that we've already seen out of Mariupol, which, that's a scary thing to think about. It's a very scary thing to think about. As we move on over here into the Kharkiv Oblast, it's a destruction of culture, not just of a nation, but a destruction of their culture as well. This is another kind of thing that kind of gears towards that crimes against humanity idea. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian aggressors have destroyed and damaged 113 cultural heritage objects in the Kharkiv region. And that's coming from Oleh Subanov, who's the head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration. Once again, if you're trying to wipe out a people, you want to wipe out their memory as well. Anything they hold dear to them. You're taking your children away from them. You're sterilizing them so they can't have more. You are repopulating an area with your own people. You are effectively destroying their cultural heritage and anything that they would signify back to another time. You're destroying monuments and landmarks and all of that. You are quite literally changing their education system, which we will get into in a little here later. But you're quite literally re-educating their youth. The ideology of doing this, you don't have to look very far. Most of these ideas, the Fourth Geneva Convention, genocide was actually coined by a Jewish individual in order to describe the Holocaust during the Nuremberg trials in 1948. That's what you really got to look at as the example. That is the reason for the Fourth Geneva Conventions. That's the reason for their protocols as things have developed over the years. And that's really what we're seeing here is really we continue to see the indiscrimination against cultural targets, against hospitals, against the civilian population, and against just Ukraine. Anything dealing with Ukraine in general. JL, Russians sure have a lot of experience with that. They did it for centuries. Exactly. They do have a lot of experience with it. The Soviet Union snuffed out any kind of nationalism that may have popped up that wasn't for the Soviet Union. Very brutal suppressions in areas such as Poland, which suffered immensely, and which is one of the reasons for the hatred of the Russians by a lot of the Polish population now. I would say all of them, but they don't take too kindly because of the Soviet occupation. And also, you have to remember that Poland was invaded by two countries, not just the one. Hitler may have started World War II, but Joseph Stalin definitely followed in with that also in 1939, when he too, about 2 weeks after the Germans started their invasion under the pact between the Germans and under the Nazi Reich and under Joseph Stalin, they jointly invaded Poland together. So you have to remember and understand that is a huge factor in history. And then all of a sudden, not only have they been invaded, but they're later occupied and turned into a Soviet bloc country. And now the tensions are obviously at an all-time high once again as the war in Ukraine has really driven a lot of Europe to the edge, especially within these former Soviet bloc countries. And we have a couple of different things. So they actually kind of messed up with the announcement here because it's so close here on the border, but it's fine. As of August the 4th, the armed forces of Ukraine have liberated the villages of Mazanivka and Dmitrivka in the Donetsk region from Russian occupiers. And that's coming from Alexei Haromov, who is the deputy head of the main operations director of the general staff of the armed forces of Ukraine. Well, it's kind of funny because Dmitrivka is actually up here north. And this is actually within the Kharkiv Oblast, not in the Donetsk Oblast, but it's very close here to the border. It's all along the Izium axis of advance, and we are seeing pretty significant combat out of this area. We know that there is significant combat out of this area, but this is Dmitrivka, and over here in the north, this is within the Kharkiv Oblast, and then right down here, right here on the border, in the Donetsk Oblast, you have Mazanivka, which has also been liberated. So that's very good to see. It means that there is at least some progress being made. When you're talking about these front lines, these are not accurate whatsoever. I want to make that very clear. Now, they're not wildly off, that's for sure, but they are not accurate. This situation is fluid. Think of these lines as if it's a wave on an ocean. It goes up and it goes down. It goes back and forth. That's what these front lines look. It's a fluid, kinetic situation. It's ever evolving. It's ever changing. There is outmaneuvering. There's outflanking. There is constant concentrations, reconcentrations, attacks, counterattacks, offensives, and defensive actions on both sides happening constantly, mostly at the company size or less. Clear down to like squad and team size efforts. That it's constantly. This battle line is constantly waving back and forth, and there are gains being made in one location while there are losses being taken in another on both sides. So this is not accurate. It's just to give you a general idea as where things are right now. As we start moving into the Donbass and really into the meat and potatoes of the war, as we start moving here into the southern front and start moving along, we see here in Luhansk, this is where the forced mobilization is coming in. The Russians are taking extremely heavy losses. That is an understatement if I ever could have made one, but the losses are immense. You see the amount of equipment that they're having to bring into Ukraine just to make up for the losses in equipment. And you have to remember that every single time they lose a piece of equipment like that, likely they have lost the crew to it as well, and that doesn't include infantry losses that they're taking. And Russia is a fully mechanized force. They don't carry light infantry battalions. Everything is either mechanized or motorized. So their losses are intense. The losses are almost indescribable. They are definitely not as heavy as the Kyiv Independent is reporting, because the war would be over by now if that was the fact. So the Kyiv Independent and the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, those losses I do not believe are accurate. I believe those are inflated numbers. Understandable, during the Gulf War, the U.S. reported that we killed the Iraqi army 7 times over, according to battlefield reports from the officers there on the front. Everyone likes to say they killed more people than they actually did in a war. And so the U.S. exterminated the entirety of the Iraqi army 7 times over. Ukraine is saying that they killed roughly about 41,000 Russian troops thus far. Makes sense. It happens. War, there's a very big thing called the fog of war. But the war would be over if that was the case. It would have been all over months ago if that was the case. So what we're seeing here, though, is the fact that there is a manpower shortage. We do know that there's heavy losses, and Russia has not mobilized. Russia does conscript, and they require conscription. Everyone must serve in the military in Russia, but it's not the case if you're in the DNR or the LNR, which are the separatist regions of Ukraine. Because Russia sees them as independent countries. Quote unquote. Are they independent countries? No, they're not. They're part of Ukraine that's occupied by the Russian Federation. Just to make that clear. Are there separatists? A very small group. But that's a whole different story that's been ongoing since 2014. If Russia hadn't propped up the separatists, there would be no separatist regions of Ukraine. It's all Russia's thing. Like, this whole thing since 2014 has been under Russia. The thing is that Russia says that they're independent countries. Therefore, they are able to forcefully mobilize their people, whereas Russia has not conducted a partial or full mobilization of their nation, because Russia is not willing to declare this a war, and a mobilization, even a partial one, requires them to admit that it is a war and not a special military operation. That is what the expectation was on the May the 9th during the Victory Day parade, and obviously we can now understand that Russia isn't willing to go that extra mile. Think of the DNR and the LNR kind of like mercenaries. Mercenary is probably the best one. Blackwater is a perfect example. The United States had a mercenary group, a PMC Corps, called Blackwater. It is a very good, or I shouldn't say good, it was a very significant military corporation, private military corporation that the U.S. employed heavily during the Iraq War. Blackwater committed some very terrible things. They did some very terrible things, but the United States could say that it wasn't their military forces that did it. It was private military contractors who acted on their own accord. That is what the DNR and the LNR are for Russia. It's plausible deniability. They're not their own. They are not Russia. Therefore, they can mobilize their people in mass, forcefully. The Russians don't. They just have to conscript like they normally would, because it's not a war for Russia, but it is a war for the separatists. Likewise, the Wagner Group, the usage of the Wagner Group in areas. Similar situation. The individual that ended up castrating a Ukrainian soldier is a member of the Wagner Group. Therefore, Russia has plausible deniability, with the ability to say that he had acted on his own accord, even if he is being put on the front lines in the war in Ukraine. Xenocide21 says these mobilized troops are going to be useless. No training. Here's a gun. Go out there and die. Pretty much. Well, not entirely. The forceful conscripts are actually getting some kind of minimal military training from, guess what? The Russian armed forces. But we do have a video. Basically, they're literally grabbing people off the street here in Luhansk. Take a look. Quite literally picking people off the streets. And we've seen this before in areas such as Donetsk too. Now, Kaysen, who's one of our mods, said, if I'm not wrong, Blackwater was split up and renamed but exists. Kind of. So something interesting happened to Blackwater. Blackwater, after the controversies, the lawsuits, and all of the wonderful things that happened legality-wise, after a lot of not so great incidents in the Iraq War that they conducted, Blackwater actually ended up filing for bankruptcy. They actually went out of business, and they were bought out by a company called Triple Canopy. Triple Canopy is a massive PMC Corps that is still active to this day. Triple Canopy employs, if you were in the military, they probably have your job. If you go to Triple Canopy, they have my job as an anti-tank missileman. I can go and I can shoot javelins for a private military corporation, and I can make on a 3-month tour $100,000 or more. Standing post, doing the same thing I did in the Marine Corps, but I get paid a lot more for it, and I do it for a lot less time. It's independent military contractors. There's a lot of different corporations. There's also Vetrus. Vetrus is another corporation, military corporation. But Blackwater was later bought out once again. They were bought from Triple Canopy, and they have now been renamed. I think they originally restarted as Blackwater, and I think they've been renamed as something else now. But they still exist. It's still the same company. It wasn't split. It was actually just bought out after all the controversies. Triple Canopy really brought it into the fold. Blackwater, all of the public issues faded from the public eye, and now they're kind of restarting their operations again. My understanding is that happened a couple years ago, is when they are now once again an independent company. I don't think they're run by the same guys, because those guys went out of business. I think most of them actually went to jail. Okay, so from the interviews I watched, a lot of them go from being picked up on the street to deployment in about 48 hours. So they let them shoot 2 mags of AK ammo and you're on your jolly way. Yeah, we've seen that they haven't been super effective, but they have one advantage, and that is numbers. The Russian Horde is a thing. Russian Horde tactic is a thing, and that's really what we see when we're talking about the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, is just the sheer number of Russian troops. And then at the front itself, Russian troops try to teach them and reorganize them. Really, there is no amount of training is important. It's very important. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. That is certainly true. But ultimately, training will never make up for experience. An experienced individual who has had time at the front lines and has actually done their job on the front lines is definitely going to have a lot more insight and a lot more tradecraft than somebody who has just done textbooks and training. When I did my first deployment, the physical look of how I looked, it's 100% different. It's crazy. I have a photo of the first night I got into country. My head is shaved. I look like a young kid. And then the very last photo, right before I returned home from when I was leaving that day in Syria, I looked like a completely different person. And I had learned so much on deployment about how to do my job that I then would try to pass down to the individuals that came in after me, or as I would have referred to them, my boot drop. But that's not the proper term. The junior Marines that came in after me, we as individuals who had deployed before, tried to teach them as best we could on the tradecraft and the things that we had learned that had been passed down to us and that we had learned on deployment. But yeah, ultimately, if they make it long enough, if they live long enough, they will eventually become effective in some capacity. Maybe limited, but they will become effective. Until then, until they actually pick up those very valuable skills on how to stay alive, and as the weak and the stupid die off, they will just be good as they'll be nothing but a number. They will just be a group, and that is what they are good for, bodies, and nothing more. Let's jump over here into the opposite side. Of course, we get our daily update from Donetsk. Quote, Russian aggressors fired missiles at the Donetsk region on August the 3rd. 3 people were killed and 5 citizens were injured. And that's coming from Pavlo Krylenko, who's the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. So we always get a 24-hour, post-24-hour update of the previous day from Pavlo Krylenko on what is happening within his jurisdiction there in the Donetsk region. So we always have that wonderful daily update to see, what the losses are on the civilian side there, as the shelling has intensified within this region quite significantly around Soledar, Bakhmut, and as we are getting ready to get into, Toretsk. Now, the Russians here have reconcentrated their forces, and they have shifted them from Lysychansk up here in the north and Severodonetsk. And after the fall of the Luhansk region, they have taken a tactical pause, and they have shifted their forces to the south and presumably up to the north of Slavyansk, with another group reportedly heading for the Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast. Seems they are wanting to do several points of different attacks in the Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast. We're not quite sure where or when. We're not quite sure when anywhere, with the one exception, and that is here in the Bakhmut, Soledar, and Toretsk area. There has been a significant increase in artillery strikes. There's also been a significant increase in fighting on the ground between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces. There have been several offensives that thus far have reportedly been repelled by well-dug-in Ukrainian defenses. but they are attempting to seize this area. Here in Bakhmut and Soledar, we already knew that this was a key objective. It was one of the main axes of advance for the Russians up until this point. Coming out of Popasna, we were seeing this even before the fall of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, where Russian troops were trying to take the city of Bakhmut. Toretsk, however, lies along a very vital line of advance. You have a couple of them that you could do. Bakhmut lies along this kind of a road. It's a key road going through here. This is the E40, and it runs all the way from just outside of Bakhmut, all the way up north, just outside of Slavyansk, and all the way up back into the Izium area. It's great if you're having a phase line. That is kind of a minimum. That is what I would say if you're limiting your objective. That is what we would see them do. If you were going to maximize your gains and you had the capacity to do so, you would see them start for Slavyansk and Toretsk almost at the same time. And we're seeing Toretsk now being hit quite significantly. Toretsk right here, it flows up from here in Toretsk, and it flows all the way up Kostanivka, and all the way up through Kramatorsk, which is a major vital hub of logistics and coordination and command and control for the Ukrainians. It has a major railhead there and a large influx of roads leading into it, so it's a very key strategic point in the Donbass. And then it flows all the way through Kramatorsk and up through Slavyansk, and once again hits the E40. This would be where I would suspect that they are trying to push for. And it seems to have been backed up with a strike in Toretsk today. Russian shelling has hit Toretsk. It hit it earlier today. The Ukrainian city, it's supposedly along this axis of advance. I can fully see it. But it hit a crowded bus stop, and 8 people were killed. 4 people, including 3 children, were wounded. And we actually get that from Pavel Korolenko as well, saying, quote, rocket attacks on the city of Toretsk in the Donetsk region on August 4th. 8 people were killed, 4 citizens were injured, including 3 children. Local residential buildings, a church, and a public transport stop were damaged. And that is actually where today's photo is coming from. This is from Toretsk. This is from the bus stop. Here, these individuals have been covered. So I felt okay to show this. But this is from Toretsk today, after the shelling took place. There is also another photo that is a little bit more graphic that we put under an 18 plus tab if you wish to look at the map and view it later. JL says, did Russians spread their ammo supplies further back or split it much more? Videos of destroyed ammo depots have decreased recently, right? What's the reason? Well, probably because it all got blown up. So the Russians having ammunition depots and pushing them further back doesn't help the situation. Splitting them up helps. I think part of the reason why we saw so many ammunition depots being hit all at once is because up until the time you start getting the HIMARS and the Mars 2 into action, you start getting the, the Excalibur round for the M777 for those that are a little bit closer to the front. You really don't see for Ukraine a way of conducting a safe way of conducting precision-guided strikes on ammunition depots, which means if you're in like the city of Donetsk, where we know that they have had quite significant amount of these command and control centers and logistical centers, whether you're talking about fuel and oil hubs or you're talking about railheads or you're talking about ammunition depots, it really makes it impractical because you're going to cause a lot of civilian casualties. And once again, we've seen Ukraine try to limit civilian casualties quite significantly. Not perfect. There is still collateral damage, and there is still people that are unfortunately losing their lives because of Ukrainian shelling. But it's quite limited in its capacity when you compare it to, say, the Russians, which are firing 10 times as many artillery shells every single day. And they are completely leveling cities off the face of the earth. It's very indiscriminate. They're using Grads very heavily, which is a 122 millimeter Katyusha rocket launcher. But it's really up until the point you get the HIMARS, and it's probably likely that they have already had time up until this point to identify a lot of ammunition depots that were sitting there, and they just couldn't. They didn't have a reasonable capacity to strike it and be effective. So I think that's why. I think that has part of it. Another part of it is there hasn't been enough time to build new ammunition depots and really find good areas to put one. And so you're seeing that the Russian forces, their ammunition depots, you already had some that were further back. I think that's important to note too. The ammunition depots, you're kind of putting them in segments. The point is that you have ammunition that will flow into the country on like a railhead or something, and that comes from a stockpile in Russia, and then that will go to an ammunition depot somewhere here in, Ukraine. Like, it'll go to Luhansk or something on rail. And then a truck will take it to Alchevsk. And then there will be a whole convoy of trucks that all they do is they take ammunition from this depot in Luhansk all the way to Alchevsk and drop it off at the next depot. And then you'll have another set of trucks, and all they do is they take ammunition from Alchevsk and they bring it down to Horlivka. And they just do that run, and they drop it off at an ammunition depot in Horlivka. And then trucks from Horlivka are going to take that ammunition, and they're going to bring it to the troops in like Shumi or Oradivka, where there's Russian troops probably sitting there, and they're actually going to deliver it to the troops. It's segments. Each truck is going to be able to make more trips. They're going to do it more quickly, and they're going to take less time, and they can carry more supplies doing so, and they're going to burn less fuel per trip. Even though you're making it longer and you're having more times, more unloading, loading times here, ultimately it's actually better for it. It shortens the amount of time overall that's needed, and maintenance time and breakdowns and stuff like that. Otherwise, you'd have trucks all the way from Alchevsk to Luhansk driving all the way from here, having to make this whole journey down bombed out roads through Horlivka and to the guys on the front line. That's more fuel that you're burning. That's less trips you can make. It takes longer to make the trips. You can carry less supplies, and you're going to do it less frequently, meaning you're going to be much more infrequent in how your troops can fight. Most of what the ammunition depots we've seen hit are the stuff that's closer to the troops, and is really lengthening out these supply lines. Now you have to go deeper into enemy territory. If you're a Ukrainian drone operator, you have to go deeper into enemy territory and put your systems very well within Russian localized air supremacy, and also air defense systems, heavy air defense system usage, putting it at risk of being shot down. And these longer range drones are going to be much more valuable to the Ukrainians. So it's going to be much more difficult to identify these targets. But you're also talking about, do you really need to? You need to destroy the stuff that's closer, so that way more trucks are going to break down. They're going to pop their tires. They're going to burn more fuel. You're trying to make it. You don't necessarily have to completely destroy the supply line. You just have to degrade it to the point that it's no longer effective. And that's really what we see the Ukrainians doing. I don't think it's a lack of running out of targets or the fact that they're splitting it up more. I think it's the fact that they're so crippled logistically. They didn't start off great, and now they definitely ain't doing so hot. Kaysen says Gherkin was angry today that Russia propaganda lied about how effective, moderate, and accurate HIMARS are. He's pretty upset. Yeah, I can bet. The HIMARS are impressive. The HIMARS and the Mars 2, the rockets that they use, the munitions that they have for those systems, it will actually put the missile, this giant missile, it can fire at 300, some variants can fire 300 kilometers. And it will put that missile from 300 kilometers away. When it flies over, it will put it within 1 meter of your intended target. That means it will put it between that target and my microphone. Whatever you intend to kill, it will kill it. As long as you have everything done properly, as long as you have put in the proper coordinates and you can guide it directly to the target and you know where your target is, like an ammunition depot is, that's way too much stuff to just kind of pick up and move. So it's dead. It will be easily destroyed by a HIMARS. And they are very accurate. That's why whenever you're talking about, whenever the Russians are saying stuff like, oh, they're targeting, they're using HIMARS and they're killing a ton of civilians. No, they're not. You're putting very precise munitions onto a very specific target. And likely what has happened is sympathetic detonations from having an ammunition depot in a highly civil, on a high populated area, such as Donetsk or Luhansk. the cook-off, the sympathetic detonation of the ammunition in this ammunition depot that you purposely put in a civilian area is now killing people as a result of the strike. The strike itself didn't kill them. Your own stupidity in putting people at risk for your purpose of shielding your stuff from strikes has actually killed them. And it backfired. JL says, I am a big fan of HIMARS. One of the biggest reasons is that their usage rather cripples logistics and destroys ammo stocks rather than killing lots of people. Exactly. That's the whole point of them, and that's why they're such a big game changer for Ukraine. As we continue down here, we continue to see a nice new toy. So this right here is a brand new tank for the Ukrainian army. The single largest supplier of Ukrainian military equipment is the Russian Federation. Hands down, the Russian Federation has single-handedly given Ukraine the ability to beat the Russian Federation. They have abandoned and lost so many vehicles that it is ridiculous. I don't even think the Iraqi army has abandoned this many vehicles during both invasions combined. Hands down, do not think that I think the Iraqi army stood a better chance. Seriously, at least they fought to the death. Like, at least they actually died fighting. The Russians abandoned their stuff all the time, and we see that once again. This guy is quoted saying, thanks to our translator in-house, he said, "Thank you for the wonderful tools. Please bring more and leave some more ammo."
Блядь, наш швидкий мобільний загін розвідників на велосипедах, на роверах. От зараз будемо куштувати. О, лопаточки забираємо, сокироньки. Дякую вам, наші... О, дякую вам, товариші. Оце все буде використано проти вас. Ми вам вельми вдячні за вашу допомогу Збройним силам України. Приїжджайте, нам ще...
I just want to point out this Slavic Chad right here that's currently rocking the Adidas slip-ons.
Приїжджайте, нам ще такої техніки потрібно. Будемо вам дуже вдячні. Але наступний раз хоча б залишайте в ній зброю та боєприпаси. Дякую, на цьому все. Наша трансляція швидкомобільного розвідувального загону 8-го окремого гірсько-штурмового батальйону завершується. До побачення, до наступних серій.
Yes. So yeah, another tank captured. And in case you're wondering how tight is it inside, this is coming from a Ukrainian soldier on another captured tank. This is a T-80. And he says, quote, "I'm not sure how you're planning to fit into it. Honestly, I just think of how tiny their tank crewmen are, and that is true. They have to be very tiny. Just check it out."
80-й. Я ебу, как ты тут будешь помещаться. Ты, может, видел вот эту хуйню? Ну, честно, какие нахуй танкисты? Ты подумай сначала. Т-80-й.
JL asks a question. He says, "Are they usually fleeing in fear, or they try to cause some crucial damage to vehicles or booby trap before they run?" Most of the time, we don't see them booby trap them. There's certainly a risk of them doing that, but for the most part, it's not really running. It's kind of running in fear. Most of the time, these tanks, they're running out of fuel. The logistics is completely crippled. The Russian Federation started with about 2/3 of the logistical vehicles needed to actually operate 15 BTGs simultaneously. That requires about 6,000 logistical vehicles of all different variants in total, and they started with about 4,300. So they didn't have the logistical capability to begin with to actually commit their entire invasion force, which they decided to do anyway. That's why you have, at the beginning of the war, such a terrible logistical situation. The communication and command and control structure also did not help, but their logistical infrastructure essentially completely broke down. That's where you see the Scooby-Doo vans being brought in on flatbed rail. and it's just they're throwing anything and everything. They're pulling and confiscating and commandeering civilian vehicles and using them for logistical purposes. And we continue to see that up until this point. It's just not widely as broadcasted, and most of them have been repainted. But we still see it. We still see them doing that same stuff. It hasn't changed. They're already suffering relatively terribly logistically, and the HIMARS haven't helped that situation. Neither has the renewed offenses by the Ukrainians and the stiff resistance that they're up against and continuing losses. A lot of what we see is that Russian tank crews either run out of ammunition or are running out of fuel, and they have no chance or hope of resupply in a reasonable time frame, and therefore they are abandoning their vehicles on the side of the road. Some of this, certainly, they sabotage their own vehicles, such as puncturing fuel tanks. We do know that that has happened. To the extent, we don't know. But we do know that it has happened. There's been enough reports of it happening to say that we're pretty, with some confidence, that some Russian troops are refusing to fight, and they are basically destroying their own vehicles in order to not fight. But I wouldn't say that's the majority. I'd say most of them are just out of options. If your tank breaks down in the middle of nowhere in Ukraine, what are you going to do? There's 3 of you inside this tank. You're probably pretty close to enemy lines, and there's no hope for resupply. There's no hope for help. What are you going to do? And so that's where we end up with these situations. Pretty common. Also, a lot of them get stuck. This one appears to have gotten stuck in a ditch and wasn't able to get itself out. So it seems that it just had some rather poor placement and some rather poor tank commander who probably was rather green, seeing as most of the tank commanders early on in the war probably have been killed at this point. And this once again falls back onto that manpower shortage. As they lose tanks, they're losing crews too. Every flipped turret is a dead crew for sure there. Riley, I feel better about my truck gas mileage after looking up how many miles per gallon a tank gets. Interesting fact, the twin turbine engines, which they are jet engines on the back of the Abrams tank, just to start the tank, just to get it running, it takes 10 gallons of diesel fuel to actually get a certain type of diesel fuel, by the way. It's actually technically jet fuel, but it takes 10 gallons of fuel just to start up the Abrams tank. Every time you want to start the tank up, it takes 10 gallons. JL, I mean, if you know you can't move with this tank, can you just throw in a grenade and destroy all electronics, etc., right? A lot of tanks for the Russian Federation are electronic. A lot of them are actually analog. They have very limited actual electronic systems inside. Some of them, more advanced ones, certainly do. The upgraded variants of the T-72 to an extent do have their own GPS, at least if you have a command variant of the tank. This one is not a command variant. You can tell that by the lack of massive amounts of antennas all over the place on it. This is just a standard upgraded T-72 main battle tank. And this one it's probably not even the most upgraded. This looks like it's a 1986 upgrade to it, or not 1986, but yeah, 1986 upgrade. Sorry, I was thinking T-90s for a second, but so it's not. Most of their vehicles are analog. They're former Soviet Union vehicles. Their T-90 is their best, most commonly field main battle tank, I would say. The T-72 upgrades are their most common tank being used on the front lines, but you're also seeing T-62s, plain Jane T-80s, plain Jane T-72s that are being operated here. MTLBs, you're seeing all of the BMP variants. There aren't a lot of electronics to be destroyed, and unlike the Abrams, there's not a whole lot of top secret stuff to destroy either, so it's really just a loss of a tank, but a very basic tank at that. They also built an eye-watering number of T-72s, so it's not as big of a loss for the Russians as it may be for, say, us to lose an Abrams. Kaysen, their vehicles are glorified danger buckets. Yeah. T-70, the T-Series tanks are great for what they were designed for, which is a war 30 years ago. Or really 40 years ago. Not for this one. Not against modern anti-armor weapons. It wasn't designed for that. It's great up against, like, the Abrams, believe it or not. It's great for its purpose, which is fighting on the Russian steppe in a war between NATO and Russia. Like, it's great for that. It's fantastic. Auto-rotating carousel means it can fire up to 9 rounds a minute. It has a 120 millimeter smoothbore gun. It's capable of firing at a high rate of speed. It takes less crew. It only takes 3 as opposed to most NATO tanks taking 4. It has a higher rate of fire. It has a lower profile, meaning it's easier to hide on a Russian steppe, which is relatively flat. It's produced in large numbers. It's relatively simple to operate, so the crews don't have to be trained nearly as much, and they have less that they have to do, so it's less of a workload. So you can use a rather relatively inexperienced crew with less training in order to operate a very similar platform, and it's similar to all of their other tank variants built post-1972. And so it's just an all-around great tank if you're talking about a tank-on-tank battle on the Russian steppe in 1980. Not great in 2022 fighting in Ukraine with a slightly different doctrine than what the Soviets had in mind for it. As we continue on, successful strikes in the south have occurred, and quote, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian 122mm self-propelled howitzer 2S1. I have no idea how to say that. Havazdika? I've always just heard it as a 2S1. A 152mm self-propelled howitzer, a 2A65 Mista B, 2 mortar complexes, which would be 82mm mortars, and an enemy command post in the south of Ukraine on August 3rd, and that's coming from Operational Command South. The Russian laws are going into effect, obviously, in the areas that they're trying to consolidate their holdings. This is the first man to be banished, according to RIA, which is a Russian state-owned media news channel. Quote, the first man banished from the region for discrediting Russian forces. Take a look.
Коваленко Иван Михайлович, вы осуществляли деятельность, направленную на воспрепятствование работе органов военно-гражданской администрации Запорожской области.
Ноги под себя! Встал!
А также по дискредитации органов российской.
Also, note the Soviet flag here in the background. Right there. Yeah, the hammer and sickle. Definitely what you should be flying, guys. If you're not trying to look like the bad guys, you're doing a very good job. JLS, by the way, you remember those announcements from Ukrainian government that they will pay to Russians that will surrender and pass their vehicles to the Ukrainian army. Any reports that actually happened? Not thus far. I have not seen any credible reports that any Russians have actually taken up on that offer. I would say that there's probably quite an immense amount of suppression amongst Russian troops. And I would say that the Russian commissars are probably very much keeping morale together at the end of a gun. I'd say to an extent. The morale for the Russians is rather deplorable from what we've seen. I mean, just look at the amount of drug usage and usage of like alcohol on the front lines, even in combat situations. I mean, we literally watched a video where they're passing around a bottle while they're operating an anti-tank post. So we know morale's not great. It's pretty terrible. Their losses aren't helping. I mean, that amount of losses when everyone you know has died. That's not really great for morale. When you have been part of a BTG, entered Ukraine, your BTG was destroyed. They took the half that was left and smashed it with another BTG that was half destroyed, and now you're half destroyed after that. You've been redone. You've had that process done to you again, sent back into combat, and now that BTG is now half destroyed, and you're somewhere in the rear echelon waiting to get smashed together with another half-forced BTG. You're really not doing great morale-wise. That's, psychologically, I have a hard time understanding how Russian troops just haven't, like, snapped completely. There's no way I think I could withstand that, like, mentally. That's got to be rough. And I don't sympathize with the Russian troops at all. I mean, they're committing egregious atrocities en masse. But that's almost impossible to fathom. And they're probably very much upheld by the barrel of a gun, and they're probably very afraid that if the Ukrainians don't kill them, their own troops will. And so I think that's some sentiments. I think there's also quite a bit of nationalistic tendencies with the Russians. I think there's some other stuff that's going on there for the Russians that's actually keeping them from doing that. But overall, I just don't have any credible reports of it to speak on. Let's jump over here to Nikopol. We've had a couple of different things happen today. Quote, Russian BM-21 Grad rockets, MLRS systems hit the Ukrainian-held city of Nikopol last night. Over 60 122mm dumbfire Katyusha rockets impacted residential areas around the city. And we're actually getting that from Amin Dzepar, who is actually a part of the Ukrainian parliament. And you can see some of the destruction here. There are no reports at this point of casualties from this, luckily. But still quite a significant amount of damage. Grad rockets, their whole purpose is to be fired in mass, and all they do is they saturate an area with munitions. They are not precision guided systems. They're an MLRS system, but they're not precision guided. It's not like the HIMARS type of MLRS, where it's firing a bunch of rockets, but they're all like guided precision munitions. These things, I want everything from this street to this street. I want this entire block gone. And that is about the accuracy of a grad rocket. I'd probably say like 3 blocks worth of destruction is probably about as accurate as a grad gets. And that's not the only thing that's happened, though, because tonight the Russians have dropped thermite on Nikopol as well, which we also have a video of. Take a look. Why is it important to talk about this? What is thermite? Thermite is an incendiary munition. It burns at thousands of degrees Fahrenheit. It lands on anything it wants to, and it immediately catches it on fire. It's banned by the Third Protocol of the Geneva Conventions in highly concentrated civilian populations. It's indiscriminate under customary international humanitarian law. It's banned against personnel. And they airburst it to cover as large of an area as they physically can. All of the little bits of, thermite rain down, and it burns through homes and people, and there's no way to put it out. It has to have, the chemical reaction actually has to end. Not everyone uses thermite. It actually has a purpose. Thermite is used for demolitions. I was even taught how to use a thermite grenade. It's really cool. It's really great if you're trying to melt through like the engine block of a vehicle or something to put it out of commission, or you're trying to burn a radio system so that way it can't be used, or weapon systems. But the usage like this is 100% just a war crime. It's just a war crime. It's just abysmally a war crime. Thermite burns at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 2,204 degrees Celsius. For those that are interested. Yeah, it's hot. Yeah, don't touch it. It's hot. Very hot. And it once again, you can't put it out. It has to burn itself out. Novokakhovka, once again, another ammunition depot has been hit. Guys, stop using Novokakhovka. Stop. This is what, the 4th one caught on camera? The 4th one that we've caught on camera now? Of an ammunition depot going off outside Novokakhovka? Seriously, guy? You put another one there? Why? One of the definitions of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. The fact that they have done this like 3 or 4 times now, and all of them have been blown up, means that whatever commander is here has to be insane. He just has to be. There's no reason to put another ammunition depot in Novokhovka. It doesn't work. Put it somewhere else. Put it in just Kakhovka for all I care. Malakhovka. Put it literally anywhere but the same city that's already been hit 3 times. It's not rocket science. We're not conducting rocket surgery here, guys. It's not... What? Here it is. Wow. But wait, there's more. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. This is just utterly ridiculous. No, Russians, just, you know what? Actually, just keep putting your ammunition depots there. Just keep putting your ammunition depots there. You know, it's funny. I've talked about several events here, and I've been like, yeah, well, the Russians are probably going to do this next. Like, because that's what I would do, right? And it's ended up happening. And the Russians are just so predictable. Like, one of the number one things you should be... In fact, it's been said several times. In fact, the Soviet Union actually said it. Is that it's the most difficult part about fighting Americans is their doctrine doesn't matter because they don't even know what they're doing. They are so unpredictable because they don't even follow their own doctrine. The Russians are completely the opposite. They follow their doctrine to such a T that it's insane. That's how we know that Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, Bakhmut, and Toretsk are going to be the next military objectives. Because they are getting such intense precursor bombardments. Because those areas are being bombarded so heavily, and a precursor bombardment is the first phase prior to an offensive by Russian ground forces. Which is going to be a mechanized spearhead. Which is why we see tanks fighting by themselves with no infantry support. Which is why we see Russian tanks blown up everywhere. JLS, does phosphorus/thermite burn through steel or concrete or steel? I think steel it will melt through. I'm not quite sure, but we have one of our mods actually jumping on there to see if it will. So I'll get that answer to you in a moment. But the Russians are just so utterly predictable because they follow their doctrine so closely. The Russians are going to use Novokhovka because Novokhovka has a dam there holding up the Dnipro River. And to destroy the dam is going to flood all of the settlements south of the river. So they know that the Ukrainians aren't going to want to hit it and destroy the dam, which is going to be needed in order to destroy the roadway. Which means this is going to be their main route of supplies, while bottleneck, at least they can still attempt to supply the area of in northern side of the Dnipro River and the Kherson Oblast. And so, hence why they're going to continue putting ammunition depots here. And the answer for you, JL, regarding if thermite can burn through steel and concrete, yes, it can burn through both. It will melt both. But that's why they keep putting stuff in Novokhovka, because they know that Ukraine will have to destroy the dam and flood everything southwards going towards the coast if they do. So, or if they want to destroy this route. It's a bottleneck, but it's better than the ferries that they have down here at the Antonovsky Bridge. But the Russians are so predictable. Enerhodar is being used as the actual facility, like inside the nuclear compound, is being used because the Russians are using it to shield their artillery, their grad systems, which is how they have grad systems within range of Nikopol, and there's very minimal attacks being struck back. That's why Ukrainians used kamikaze drones to actually strike at some of these here at the facility at Enerhodar, and why Russia is making such a big deal about Ukrainians are striking the Anahetar nuclear facility. Well, maybe if you don't put your grad systems there to use a nuclear facility as a shield, it wouldn't be so bad. Once again, precursor bombardments. We know that that's happening. Toretsk, that's a precursor bombardment. Bakhmut, Soledar, Kostanivka, Chasiv Yar, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. Like, we know that the Russians are going to be attacking along this axis of advance because that's where they're bombing most heavily. Izium has severe fighting, but they're not really shelling any of these villages too heavily. So we know that they're on the defensive here in the Izium area. Kharkiv, they're shelling it. They're going to shell it to extermination with S-300 and S-400 missile batteries and the Iskander-M missile systems from Belgorod, but they're not actually going to make any pushes here because they don't have the manpower to be able to do so. So they can't, since they don't have the ability. You might see a minor counteroffensive near Chuahiv because Chuahiv has received a lot of artillery fire lately. It's also closer to the front line where you could have at least some limited successes if you're on the Russian side. That's the Russian game plan right now. Like, the Russian game plan is maybe an assault on Chuahiv here in the next coming days. Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Kostanivka, Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut, Soledar, and Toretsk. That is where the fighting is going to take place. I'm calling it now. This is where the main fighting is going to take place. If I had to take a guess, I think they're going to try and push up to Kamyansk over here, and they're going to try and push up towards Zaporizhia on this side of the Dnipro River, and that's why we're seeing troop concentrations coming out of Mariupol, Melitopol, and coming through Berdyansk up into this area, and also being shifted down from further locations here in the Luhansk Oblast, and also coming up from Crimea. And then they're just trying to hold on to their areas over here on the Kherson Oblast because resupply is so difficult, which is why we see shelling being much more limited, and we're seeing much more maneuver warfare within this region, with Ukrainian strikes hitting ammunition depots in places like Novikhovka, because this is reasonably the only place that the Russians can consistently bring supplies and troops across, so it only makes sense that the Russians would continue to put an ammunition depot here. Like, that is, like, textbook. Like, based off of the Russian doctrine alone, we can deduce what the Russians are getting ready to do. I might be surprised. I might be wrong. But I don't think so. I'll call it here. We can make a bet if you want, but I don't know how I'd pay out. I don't know. Give $500 to a charity or something, maybe. But we'll go with that. I don't know. We'll figure out something, guys. Give your comment on the video with an idea of what bet you want to make with me regarding the regarding this. Maybe I'll take up one of your ideas in a later video regarding whether or not I'm right about what the Russians are going to do. Anyway, over here in Mykolaiv, the Russian strikes are adding up here in Mykolaiv. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian occupiers have killed 131 Ukrainian citizens, including one child, and injured 590 in the city of Mykolaiv. And that's coming from Alexandra Sienkiewicz, who is the mayor of Mykolaiv. Yeah, so those strikes are adding up. Each time they hit Mykolaiv, that's more casualties, that's more tallies. Really, at this point, it's just a long game of statistics. And it's a terrible one. That's what a war of atrocity is. And that's what we're seeing now, is who can increase each other's statistics before somebody breaks. And they're both hoping that the other one breaks. Let's just jump down here into Crimea, where 3 human rights lawyers have been stripped of their licenses. 3 Crimean Tatar human rights lawyers were stripped of their licenses for defending victims of persecution in the occupied region of Crimea. 3 lawyers had all been forced to obtain their license in the Chamber of Laws in Chechnya, with the Hemedis positively obstructed when she sought to obtain it in Crimea. Tatars have been particularly targeted during Soviet times, in which carried on past its collapse. Soviet media's long-standing practice of only depicting them in a negative way, along with its practice of promoting negative stereotypes in order to provide a political justification for their deportation and marginalization. You can actually see this from the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. And if you want to learn about Tatarophobia, or Tatarophobia, which is actually the hating of Tatars and some people from Siberia, then we actually have the wiki article down there for you guys, so you can learn a little bit more. Also, off of Sevastopol, another ship was possibly destroyed. It's possible that another ship has been sunk by Ukrainian troops. There's also an interesting thing that happens. There's another incident in Sevastopol from a patrol boat that we're not quite sure what's happening with it, but both videos are rather interesting, so we're going to go ahead and throw them in here. We figured it might be something to keep an eye on as we were going forward looking for this news. And just take a look. So this is from the ship that was possibly destroyed. We can see here that thick black smoke that's pouring up from the horizon there. Is a good telltale sign that something may have been sunk. Let me take a look. And the second thing here is something, this is just off of Sevastopol. And this is a patrol boat. We're not quite sure what has happened, but something has happened, and we can't identify what it is, but it was something to note. So just take it with a grain of salt that this is something to note.
Это что такое?
Once again, not quite sure what this patrol boat is doing here at Sevastopol, but something is happening. Once again, it's something to just take note of. Take it with a grain of salt. We're not saying another ship has been sunk. I want to make that clear. I want to make it clear. We're saying that it's a possibility that a ship has been sunk, as well as another incident has taken place. So, just to be clear, we cannot confirm nor do we believe that a ship certainly has been sunk. It's just that there is a possibility that one may have been. And we're going to wait for some follow-up stuff on that, but the images seem to at least show the possibility of something may have happened that's going to be rather significant in the coming days. So, with that, we'll keep an eye on that situation if we can, and hopefully some more details come to light as to the situation that has been occurring. That's actually all of the news inside of the country of Ukraine. That's everything inside of the country, but that's not everything in the world, and there's quite a bit of interesting stuff that's happened. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the international news. And we actually start off with Russia. Oh, Russia. Russia is an interesting place. A very interesting place. But we're going to start off here in Belgorod. Because, remember, to drive sober or get pulled over. I think a crew member on board an MTLB may have had a few too many bottles of vodka. Because a Russian MTLB crashed through a family's home. And this happened in the middle of the night. Collapsed the wall and part of the roof. Luckily, no one was injured. But it's... Yeah. Straight up into their house. There's even some better pictures that we were able to find. That is an MTLB in somebody's home. In Belgorod. In the city of Belgorod. Could you imagine waking up to this? There is no way this guy was not drunk. Like, look, like it's coming through their like it's coming through the wall of their house. And of course, there we go. There's the beautiful invasion marking. God, how do you screw up this bad? This is so hard. Like, the MTLB was purposely built so basically anyone could drive this thing. This guy had no way. There's no way this guy just wasn't just drunk. So remember, don't drink and drive because you might put your armored personnel carrier through someone's house. It's not the only interesting news when it comes to the war, because an interesting development has occurred. So, for months now, people have been talking about China may be supporting, Russia hasn't been getting support from China, at least openly. That seems to have changed. That seems to have changed significantly. This is from the Rostov Oblast here in Russia, which appears to be well en route to Ukraine. And this is Chinese military equipment that has been spotted here in the Rostov Oblast. It's been clearly marked with the PLA insignias, and it is very clearly in the camouflage scheme of the PLA. And we can go ahead and take a look. If this is true, which I highly believe it is, and you're getting ready to see why, we can see the insignia, the PLA, the Chinese military insignias on these vehicles. The Chinese flag is actually on these vehicles. And this is in the Rostov Oblast. And it is not a small quantity of vehicles. A lot of it's logistical vehicles. But this now means that China, there it is, the nice clean Chinese hammer and sickle. Very nice clean Chinese flag. It's the last bastion of communism. This means that the Chinese are supplying the Russian Federation with equipment and manpower. Or I wouldn't say manpower yet. They haven't entered the war. But they are now supplying equipment, especially logistical equipment, which we know is the major shortcoming of the Russian Federation. And that is a huge change in policy, openly, if so. JL says this is not a good sign. No, it is not. If this is certainly the case, China has a lot at its disposal. Given the recent revelations that have occurred as a result of the Taiwan visit, this could be one of the major consequences that China was referring to. It may not have been a military action against Taiwan itself. They certainly do make a case for it when it comes to their military exercises, which we will get to here later. But it seems that part of their consequences, their grave consequences that they gave to the United States, maybe that they are now going to openly support the Russian Federation with equipment. And if that's the case, they have a lot of logistical equipment, which is going to significantly bolster the Russian ability to wage war in the country of Ukraine quite significantly. And the Chinese has a lot of it to give to Russia in a large capacity to build more of it. So that is going, if that is in fact the case, which it very highly seems to be, that is a very, very, very significant change in the war. Jump up here into St. Petersburg. Duty-free stores are now being launched within Moscow and St. Petersburg, where many international and foreign consulates are located. Russia is launching these specifically to be accessible only by diplomats, employees of embassies, consulates, and international organizations and their family. It's an old Soviet tactic. It's called the Berezka, and it's a system used in order to tempt diplomats into spending foreign exchange currency, which once again will be used to prop up the ruble, which we've seen the Russian Federation do up until this point. If you want to see more, you can read more here at medusa.io. JL says this is literally letting know NATO who is their new enemy now. It's a dark comparison that I make, but I think it really, it's probably the most appropriate one. I think it's dark, and I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, but it's kind of similar. for those that don't study history, history is doomed to repeat itself. And the Russian Federation is the Nazi Germany of today, I would say, in a way. I would say if you're going to compare it to the Axis powers, the Axis of evil, then Russia would represent Nazi Germany, and China would represent Japan. They are definitely the ones, and then you have the minor Axis powers as well, such as North Korea, Armenia, that kind of stuff. Because a lot of these these countries are aligned with either China or Russia. Armenia is one of those countries that is aligned with Russia. So that's kind of what we see. Or Belarus, same thing. Belarus, I think, is like the Italy of the Axis, of the new Axis of evil, I would say. But that's how I would compare it. A lot of them have very big anti-Western sentiments. A lot of them they're looking to be an expansionist power. Russia is trying to physically expand its sphere of influence. With the war in Ukraine, they are constantly trying to expand their sphere of influence through political measures. In Syria, in international interventions, in Africa, very heavily with the use of the Wagner Group. China is doing the same with expanding their sphere of influence, but they're doing it in a different way. They're doing it economically. They are undercutting competition quite significantly when it comes to big contracts, the building of ports and the building of infrastructure, railways, things that make other countries reliable on China, or relying on China, and to the extent that they may be even building military bases in some areas as a result of this, without really the international community being able to confirm so, which we see. They are very militant. They have over 2 million members in their military. North Korea, obviously, we know that they're looking to build a nuclear warhead, but it's really kind of the axis of evils. You have one in Europe and you have one in the Pacific. This is the best comparison I can make to something that you can historically look at. It's not the same. I don't want it to sound like that. It's not exactly the same, like, at all. It's two very different situations, but overall that's the best comparison you could make, I think, at this point, historically speaking, the best comparison to make. They're two expansionist powers with similar ideologies that are both pretty much authoritarian governments that have a lot of anti-Western sentiments and would like to expand at least their sphere of influence, if not their actual physical power. And as we jump down here into Moscow, we have a couple of different things. First of all, Brittany Griner, the WNBA player, or the women's NBA player, has been found guilty and then sentenced to 9 years in a Russian prison. The negotiations for prisoner exchange are ongoing right now. The Russians are currently seeking a notorious arms dealer and a hitman in order to exchange for Brittany Griner, who is currently, I believe, serving a life prison sentence in the United States. U.S. President Joe Biden denounced the verdict and sentence as unacceptable. She's currently was found guilty of possession and smuggling of what they suspect was planted CBD oils in her vape. So, or on a vape, and vape cartridges on her bag when she was traveling through customs.
Will you appeal? Brittany, will you appeal?
Good luck. Good luck.
I'd just like to clearly point out that the Russian police forces look very militarized. I mean, really militarized. Just my observation, though. And JL has stated, I hope that India won't be short-sighted in this scenario if that's the case. Well, actually, we have some news on that later, so we'll get to that once we get into kind of the Asia Indo-Pacific region. So we have some news on that. Should we make VPNs illegal? Oh man, state-run media news agencies in Russia are very, very interesting, to say the least. And this one may have included a Freudian slip, but that's for you to decide. Maria Butina, who was convicted and deported from the United States in 2018 for being a foreign agent of Russia, is calling for prison sentences for using VPN and convicting parents of children whose kids use VPNs. Soloviv is opposing the idea of losing YouTube and Netflix. So, Soloviv, in the heat of the argument, has slipped up and names Russia a dictatorship. Quote, "We will soon reach a level of dictatorship which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world." Congratulations, guys. You did it. You just named yourself. Big oops. I'm sure someone's probably getting fired right now. Or they're just going to disappear. That's a possibility, too. Or just get sent to the front. That's also a good possibility. The Germans were notorious for doing that. You screwed up, you went to the Eastern Front, because no one wanted to go to the Eastern Front. Banning VPNs. We've talked about this here on the channel before. VPNs are used, especially amongst younger generation, which is why they're specifically talking about putting prison sentence on the older generation for their children's decisions. And the use of VPNs is really the only way that in Russia you can get external news, independent news. It's the only way that you can get news about what's happening in the nation of Ukraine, about the actual war effort. This is probably something that the Russian Federation has probably been considering anyway. And the fact that it's being talked about on Russian state-run media news channels means it's less of an argument and more of a preparation. It's preparing the public for the State Duma to do this. There's a reason why this topic got approved and is being talked about on something that's state-run. But what this does is further suppression of independent news abilities, and it's suppression of your local population, your domestic populations. Calling it a dictatorship, well, that's a Freudian slip if I ever saw one, but congratulations, we already knew, you just had to say it openly. Just check it out.
100 человек, которые пользуются VPN, а у нас один из руководителей администрации президента сказал, что это нормально и что он пользуется и смотрит.
Так вот это ненормально.
Но это же было?
Это ненормально. И не потому, что мы пытаемся как-то обмануть систему, а потому что, понимаешь, здесь вопрос-то в
куда
том,
ты их загонишь?
ты морально делаешь...
Я понимаю. Но вот мы это закроем.
Ой,
а что мы им
какое у нас
предлагаем?
будет страдание, если у нас Ютуба-то не будет,
Я тебе скажу так, для тебя
Всё.
не будет, может быть, для меня не
Книги
будет,
будем
а
читать.
детей мы потеряем. Не будут они читать книги. Они
Научатся.
поставят VPN, потому что практика поиск стой раз-два не работает. Если ты не можешь предложить им более качественный продукт...
Если мы, взрослые, не в состоянии ограничить своих детей,
мы не в
воспитать,
состоянии.
ну то нас нет.
Здрасте, в Екатеринбурге у тебя состояние или нет? Они сказали,
Ну,
они
со
против
временем
буквы Z.
воспитать.
Студенты.
Со временем
Предлагаешь
воспитаем.
посадить их родителей?
Конечно,
Посадить их родителей?
конечно. А кто
Отлично.
воспитывал?
А я посмотрю, как их будешь сажать. На основании чего? Что они плохо воспитали своих детей?
Воспитывать детей
сейчас
надо.
доживем до такого уровня диктатуры,
Интересно,
которой
а
нигде в
вы, и
мире
вы
нет.
потом...
Nice. Very nice. Wow, Russia. Brainwashing continues. I mean, sorry, education. But brainwashing continues for the Russian Federation. Apparently, there's no need to continue brainwashing their own population with the thoughts of the I'm trying to think of what they call their war, the Great Patriotic War. I think that's also what the North Koreans call the Korean War as well. But they call that World War II. And because Ukraine taught World War II and not the Great Patriotic War, apparently that and since there's a special military operation, we got to be the good guys and make sure that their education system is teaching people correctly. Because Ukraine is a bunch of Nazis, right? Yeah, no. But that's what the Russians certainly think. Just take a look. Children were told to go to school with a leaky roof here in this region of Russia. Because of all the rains, their schools are dilapidated. Especially the further east you go, the worse it gets. But they're focused on rebuilding the education inside of places like the Melitopol area and places such as in Donetsk and Luhansk, because those people were taught incorrectly.
Комната. То есть вот такая система у нас сделана для отведения, так сказать, влаги, которая течет у нас с крыши. Это вот сегодня опять же прошел дождь, это все рушится, это все падает детям на голову, все эти штукатурки. Вот это вот все у нас течет из этого короба, течет вот сюда вот в таз, пол соответственно мокрый, все мокрое, здесь туалет и уборная, это все течет, это все дети, это все дошколята.
Dilapidated, to say the least. But that starts bringing us into the rest of Europe. Here in Northern Macedonia, North Macedonia actually handed over 4 Su-25 Frogfoots over back to Ukraine. In fact, they acquired these aircraft from Ukraine in during the 2001 conflict in North Macedonia for $4 million, or 4 million euros. Sorry. They have designed to directly support the infantry and several sorties in support of ground operations in the Macedonian security forces. The country planned to sell the Su-25s back in 2004. Now, reportedly, they have been handed back to Ukraine free of charge. And you can get more on that from ukrainenews.com, which we have linked down there below. And as tensions have heated up between Armenia and Azerbaijan, up here in London at the Azerbaijani embassy, it was attacked here in Great Britain and Northern Ireland as by several members of the Shiite Union of the Servants of Mahdi. As reported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, breaking into the embassy building, the individuals raised religious flags on the porch of the building and chanted religious slogans. After the local police intervened, the members of the group were taken out of the building and detained. The embassy staff were not injured. The incident is being investigated by local law enforcement, and the motives are being clarified. Additional information on the results of the investigation will be provided. You can take a look here. And that begins to bring us down into the Middle East. Up here in Tal Rafat, we see that 9 people were injured in a UAV attack. It's not known who the UAV was used by, but the Kurdish forces are currently saying it was a Turkish drone. But this 9 people, including 6 children, were injured after a kamikaze UAV reportedly hit a busy market in Tal Rafat. You could see, obviously, some of the damage, the immediate impact there on the ground. And as we move over here into Iran, Iran has arrested 10 Islamic State militants, according to the Ministry of Information and National Security. So these are Islamic State militants. The operation took place from the 1st to the 3rd of August in several provinces in the west and south of the country. During the arrest, one of the jihadist cells resisted and started a shootout with law enforcement officers. 2 security officials were injured. During searches of the home of the Islamists, law enforcement officers found communications equipment, weapons, and IEDs. According to the Iranian intelligence officials, Islamic State militants plan to carry out a series of terrorist attacks during religious ceremonies and the occasion of the Day of Ashura.
الحمد لله معز الإسلام بنصره ومذل الشرك بقهره.
این اعضای گروهک داعش در ایران تحت تعقیب نیروهای وزارت اطلاعات، افرادی که قصد داشتند در مراسم‌های عزاداری عمل.
So that's just the local media report regarding this. Unfortunately, I don't know enough Arabic to translate that for you, but we do understand kind of in general what's happening there. In Afghanistan, here in Kabul, the Taliban is going to investigate the assassination of the senior Al-Qaeda official, and this is coming from the Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid, who said that the group is investigating U.S. President Joe Biden's statement about the assassination of Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul. According to him, the leadership of the Pashtun nationalists allegedly did not know about the residence of al-Zawahiri in the capital of Afghanistan. Mujahid also added that the Taliban wanted to comply with the Doha Agreement and urges Washington not to violate it. The Doha Agreement is the agreement that was signed in order to kind of bring the warring parties to peace at the end of the U.S. occupation in Afghanistan. And as promised, up here in India, regarding JL, saying that I hope that India, does not make a short-sighted decision here. India and the United States are going to hold joint military exercises. India and U.S. troops will conduct a 2-week-long military exercise in the high-altitude areas near the Line of Actual Control, or LAC, starting October 14th. The venue is near Awuli in Uttarakhand and at an altitude of 10,000 feet. The India-U.S. joint military exercise named Yud Adbayas will be, and this will be its 15th edition. The joint exercises will end on October 31st. India has a long history with high-altitude warfare. And as I'm betting you can guess, what is the closest neighbor here? Oh, yeah. China. China is the closest neighbor. So, very important. It seems that they apparently are going to make a decision, but India and China do not necessarily get along very well. So that makes a little bit of sense there. While they do walk a fine line when it comes to Russia, India definitely has no sympathies with China, and considering that the two countries seem to be more aligned between China and Russia, I think those tendencies may be shifting a little bit geopolitically. And we're probably going to see a lot of ramifications geopolitically because of some of the actions that have now occurred throughout the world with some rather irreversible consequences. Speaking on China, Taiwan here, they're all around Taiwan, there are impact zones. The Chinese army has begun its large-scale live-fire military exercise around Taiwan. It is reported that the DF-17 hypersonic missile, the aircraft carrier killer, and long-range artillery will be used for the first time. Exercises will be held from the 4th to the 7th of August. To say that China is upset with Taiwan right now would be a vast understatement. They already didn't like each other. This is definitely not helping. As we move over here into the Borno region of Nigeria. The Islamic State militants did attack yet another convoy of the Nigerian security forces. The gendarmerie here were attacked. They killed one security official, and the official's car in the escort group was also destroyed. But that is all the information we currently have on the situation. Of course, the Islamic State is going to be advertising this. That poor Toyota Hilux. So the Islamic State continues to be very active within the Borno region of Nigeria and all throughout Africa. Jump over here into the United States, where a bit of good news here. Washington, the U.S. Senate has approved Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO. The U.S. Senate supported the resolution on the entry of Finland and Sweden into NATO, thereby agreeing to the proposal of President Joe Biden. The Senate voted 95-1 to support ratification of accession documents, easily surpassing the two-thirds majority of 67 votes required to support the ratification of the two countries. That document will be sent to the President's signature, after which it will be sent to the alliance. The entry of Finland and Sweden will have to be approved by all NATO members. We can get that here from the U.S. Senate updates. So pretty sweet indeed. But that starts to bring us into the interesting news of the day. And the first thing we actually have up here is at the Red Bank Battlefield Park here in New Jersey. Now, right here on the border between New Jersey and Pennsylvania, right there on the Delaware River, the mass grave of Revolutionary War mercenaries has been unearthed. It's only the remains of about a dozen Hessian mercenaries who died during the Battle of the Red Bank in 1777. Volunteer diggers also unearthed a number of treasures, including the weapons and a rare 1776 King George III gold guinea coin. In addition to the human remains, the researchers also found five musket balls, pewter and brass buttons, grape shot, a lead canister shot, a knee buckle from a uniform that contained human bloodstains, and a gold guinea coin, equivalent to a soldier's pay for a month's work. Currently, all of the human remains are with the New Jersey State Police Forensic Unit and will undergo DNA extraction so the anthropologists can learn more about these soldiers. Hessian mercenaries were used by the British during World War II. Were used by the British during the Revolutionary War. The Hessians come from Hessia, which is in Germany. So they are a group of German mercenaries. This would have been their area of operations during that time in the winter of 1776 and 1777. This would have been right about the same time as George Washington had just probably crossed the Delaware River. And this is kind of where that all was taking place. George Washington's army had actually crossed the Delaware River on Christmas. So very important period of time, very interesting period of time, and the fact that we're still finding stuff is pretty amazing. There's always stuff still left to be discovered at a lot of these very important places. But as you can see, there's that gold coin. We're seeing those buttons being popped up. And if you want to learn more about this, you can check it out on Live Science. As you jump over here and start moving into the Middle East, we see here in Cairo, where an ancient Egyptian temple to the sun cult was uncovered near Cairo. Archaeologists have unearthed the remains of a 4,500-year-old temple dedicated to the Egyptian sun god Ra at the site of Abu Ghurab at about 12 miles or 20 kilometers south of Cairo. The temple was built sometime during ancient Egypt's 5th dynasty, which is about 2465 BC to about 2323 BC, a period in which the cult of the sun reached its apex with the construction of a new type of monument specifically devoted to the sun god, commonly known as the Sun Temple. The newly uncovered Sun Temple was made from mud bricks and measured at least 197 feet long and 66 feet wide, which is about 60 meters by 20 meters, and contained an L-shaped entrance portico, a courtyard, storage rooms, and rooms that may have been used for cultic purposes. The temple was ritually demolished, therefore, possibly before it was even finished, so the new Sun Temple could be made from the stone of the site of the pharaoh named Nuzir. We can go ahead and take a look at some of this. So, pretty cool. Ancient Egypt is full of so much history. There's so much history to be found here. But it's really cool that they're finding these kind of sites still, and that there's still much more left to be uncovered. Egypt is so old. Some of the stuff in Egypt is so old. To the Romans, Egypt was ancient. To the Romans, the Great Pyramids of Giza were ancient wonders. I want you to try and think about that. The Romans, to us now, who we consider an ancient culture, an old, historical ancient culture, they thought that the pyramids were ancient. When the pyramids of Giza were built, there were still live mammals, or there were still live mammoths on the earth, roaming freely in North America. Think about that. In fact, it's so old that people who plundered many of these tombs, what they left behind is considered an ancient artifact. That is crazy to think about. So, once again, if you want to learn more about this, you can check it out on Live Science. And finally, we come up here into Jerusalem. And here into Egypt, where the first synthetic mouse embryos were created with no sperm, eggs, or womb. For the first time, scientists have created mouse embryos in the lab without using any eggs or sperm and watched them grow outside the womb. To achieve this feat, researchers used only the stem cells and a spinning device filled with shiny glass vials. The breakthrough experiment took place in a specially designed bioreactor that serves as an artificial womb for developing embryos. Within the device, embryos float in a small beaker of nutrient-filled solution. And the beakers are all locked into a spinning cylinder that keeps them in constant motion. This movement simulates how blood and nutrients flow to the placenta. The device also replicates the atmospheric pressure of a mouse uterus. That is wild. That is crazy. That means as long as you have stem cells, you can create life. You can create you can create a complex creature from a very tiny amount of cells. As long as you have the cells, you can just create as you will. That is insane. That is absolutely just mind-blowing. How? Like, these people literally just created life. Like, this is like playing God levels of what. So if you can do it realistically, think about it. If you can create a complex organism, you're not talking about creating like a bacteria or something. No, you're not talking about creating a simple organism. You're talking about creating a mouse. A mouse has lungs, a mouse has a uterus, a mouse has, a heart, a brain, all of this stuff. It has all of it. It's a complex organism. It's a complex mammal. And that same theory. In theory, as long as you had a human stem cell, you could do the same thing with a human stem cell. You could create a human. And everybody has a stem cell. You can create a human being in a laboratory doing this. That is ultimately what this means. You could create anything you wanted, as long as you had the stem cells for it. Riley Ormond says, I don't know if they have done it yet or if they are still working on it, but I remember hearing about scientists were working for a way, say, 2 women have a biological child together. Exactly. So that's, you can create literal life with this, complex life doing this. That is a huge, huge, huge breakthrough. And that's a huge deal in humanity, in medicine, because that means that it, as long as the cells are there, like, you can create it. If you had the stem cells of a dinosaur, you could create a dinosaur. Yeah, JL, I just now saw, so I just now see your message as I say that. Does that mean that Jurassic Park will become reality? As long as you have the stem cells, yes, actually. You could technically create life with this. You can create life technically on that basis. Like, as long as you can recreate the necessary ingredients for life. Now, eggs are a little bit different. Eggs require, turning and stuff like that. If you've ever, when I was in school, we had a course where we actually ended up building our own incubators and hatching quail, live quail, which is really cool. But you have to turn eggs and stuff in order to make sure they form correctly. But in principle, yes, you could. If you had started in Siberia, you technically could create a mammoth. You could grow a mammoth artificially. You just have to scale it up. Human beings, dinosaurs, aliens, whatever you wanted, as long as you had the stem cells for it. Technically, with this idea, as long as you scaled it correctly, you could, in theory, create whatever you wanted. In theory. Now, morality-wise, that's a huge question. Because, once again, at that point, are you just playing God? And is that something you want to play with? There's a lot of moral questions to be brought up with this. But, nonetheless, this is a mind-blowing thing to have happened. This is mind-blowing. Because think of all the other developments that they have come up with that we talked about just on this channel regarding genome sequencing and regarding things that could cure cancer and adjustments to DNA and all of that stuff. Like, if you can grow a person in a lab, you can DNA sequence them, you can adjust their DNA, that's literally building a human being to what you want it to be. Perfect eyesight, amazing cardiovascular health, perfect, absolute brainiac, whatever you wanted. In theory, all of those things could come together to create that. The perfect human being is what that could be if you scaled all of this stuff correctly. And it wouldn't take much. A lot of people are working on independent projects for different purposes entirely that lead into this. Human genome sequencing has, as Riley put it, science is fascinating yet terrifying. Yeah, but that's like, if genome sequencing for human beings and adjusting DNA and curing cancer and growing mice in a test tube have nothing to do in common with each other. But if you put them all together, you could, in theory, create whatever you wanted. Lab-grown meat? Yes, we have. JL says we've already created lab-grown meat, so that is just next level, I guess. This is beyond next level. Meat is not alive. Meat is not a complex living machine that thinks, feels, has consciousness, breathes and blinks and eats and drinks and everything else. It's not. And it's not. It's beyond next level. This is beyond next level. This is science fiction level of what is happening right now. So that's... So anyway, so our lives just completely changed forever in multiple ways here today. For a lot of different reasons. Some of it cool, some of it slightly terrifying, to be honest. The idea that we could create a perfect human being in the image that of our own design is slightly terrifying if scaled correctly. But I'm sure that's a long way off, and once again, there's a lot of moral questions that have to be answered, and that's probably going to be answered in governments everywhere. But the principles are there. It's cool, it's terrifying. There's wars, there's death, there's famine, there's the creation of life. We've seen it all here on this channel today, the whole range in the life cycle going on here, and the whole geopolitical situations, many of which are completely shaping a new world in which we live in. But with a lot of these situations, it is not usually cool or even slightly terrifying to think about when you just look 10, 20 years in the future. But a lot of it is a lot of death and destruction, and it's a lot of human suffering, ultimately. Famine and drought and pestilence. All the four horsemen of the apocalypse, if you will. But luckily we can help. You guys have allowed us to be an amazing channel. This is our 101st episode. We celebrated our 100th episode yesterday. And you guys have built an awesome community, and I can't thank you enough for that. There is a ton of stuff that we want to continue to do. There's a lot of stuff that we're looking forward to trying to do. We are never putting super chats on this channel. We're never putting merchandising for this channel. As cool as it would be to have like a little pillow with the, with our global emblem or something, profiteering off of suffering really isn't something that any of us want to do on this team. And it is a team effort. I mean, everyone, Kaysen, Riley, everyone comes together to put this thing together for you all every night. And they do a lot of research and a lot of hard work. So make sure to give them a round of applause and a hand there. But none of us want to profiteer off of people. We want to help. So check out the video description below and check out all of the different organizations that are down there. And please jump onto the Discord and give us some more. We're constantly looking to add to that list. We want to fill all 5,000 characters on the YouTube description with nothing but links for description, with links for organizations and charities and fundraisers. And we want to bring more people to this and grow this community and do a lot of good with it. So if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, that's fine. Give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us. And we'll continue to grow these things with you guys. And we'll continue to move forward. And we'll continue reporting on the news and making a good impact on it. And a meaningful impact for people suffering globally. So once again, thank you guys for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you guys coming here. Whatever bet you guys want to make with me, let's keep it for charities if we could. I really don't want to bet anyone money, but I would like to try. Please give your options for a bet in the comments. I'm thinking something like I'll put $500 toward a charity or something for you guys if I lose the bet on if I'm right about Bakhmut, Toretsk, Slavyansk, and Kramatorsk. If I'm right, then maybe we'll find a way to do a huge fundraiser. If I'm wrong, then $500 to charity, but either way, the charities win. So if you have a different idea, go ahead and post it in the comments. But other than that, I will hopefully see you guys back here once again tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, at 9 p.m. Central. I hope that you guys are going to be remaining safe. Happy Friday, by the way. So I hope you guys have a wonderful Friday. Hopefully you'll be joining us once again tomorrow. Please be safe. I hope that your friends and your family also remain safe. And if not, I hope that you guys find that safety and security in the very near future. Other than that, I will talk to you guys later. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night and a fantastic end to your week and Friday.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стояти вам на ваги, і чудно кличіть, ідіть нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше швидко. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличіть, ідіть нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям печем, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличіть, ідіть нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkled bum. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличіть, ідіть нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличіть, ідіть нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличіть, ідіть нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличіть, ідіть нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Ідіть нахуй.